Do you still hold that stereotypical image of a great student in university as being quiet, nerdy, wearing glasses, and carrying a knapsack? That was me in high school. Not the stereotype, but the guy who had a narrow view of academically inclined people. My limited understanding was partly due to being among kids who often challenged the status quo, a story for another time. Anyway, my perspective was challenged when I got to Wits. Suddenly, or all of a Sunday, as we used to say back in the day, I met people who went about their lives like any regular young person. People who thought of themselves as,
I'm not social and I'm not academic. I only socialize with my friends. And academics, we're not socializing.
I'd say I'm much more academic than I am social, but I do try my best to interact with people. I also have the tendency to say, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to hang out today because I have way too much to do.
I'm a little bit of everything because I can definitely be social when I need to be social. I'm consistently academic because I am here for academic purposes. But yeah, I can be extroverted, but I can also be introverted, kind of like an ambivert. So it really just goes according to the vibe, according to how I'm feeling that day, my energy. But I am quite an adaptable person.
you see, stereotypically studenty. Welcome to the second episode of the Hack Your Future podcast. Today, we'll explore essential strategies for thriving in university and beyond. We'll hear from some of Wits University's greatest academics, professionals, and activists who gained their edge from one of South Africa's top universities. I'm your host, Melusi Ngala, and today's episode is all about staying true to yourself while remaining determined and focused. That means being yourself and keeping your goals in sight at all times.
I was a very naughty child, so I would get a lot of smacking from my mom. You know, she wouldn't try to kill me. Of course, she would try to discipline me.
Sure.
I was disciplined in front of people, but when my mom left me in my own space, I would get up to a lot of nonsense. I would annoy her a lot. On one occasion when we were in Soshanguve, my grandfather used to have these old lawn mowers. You just push it, then it had blades that turn and cut the grass. So this one time he left it hanging on one of the trees because I think he was fixing one of the wheels. So it had been sitting there for a while. And I went to play with one of the wheels and I turned it and my finger got stuck and I actually cut my finger. And then again, my mom smacked me a bit. Then we took a taxi to the hospital. I almost lost a finger.
Do you remember Dr. Isaac Nape from the first episode? That's him sharing a story from his childhood and his mom's way of setting him straight. It's almost like how some of us used to thump the bulky TV set to get a clear picture. Side note, we do not encourage violence of any sort on this podcast. To the parents, be nice. Evidently, Dr. Nape was a typical curious kid. Unfortunately, or fortunately, he didn't have a laboratory. So when his curiosity peaked, he'd get creative. With his siblings, he would play games with bricks in the township. In contrast, Michelle Ramsey, a professor in human genetics at the National Health Laboratory Services, describes herself as a bookworm, but her parents were quite laid back.
I would say nerdy is probably quite right. And not only am I a nerd, but so are my children and my husband. But my parents, I never felt that they put pressure on us to do well, but they enjoyed our achievements. And I think that was nice, that we didn't feel that it was really important to excel in academia. As long as we did all right, that was okay.
She explains that her scholarly parents often discussed scientific and technological developments during family meals.
We didn't talk that much about politics. I think it was more around what was happening at the time, plans and events and things that you're doing. I didn't feel that we discussed sort of issues like ethical issues and so on. I think I do that much more now, and I do it more with my children because of the environment. I've always been excited by science, so we would talk about advances in space travel or technological advances and what that might mean. That would have been part of the older teenage discussion, because I have two sisters and one of my other sisters is also a professor of biochemistry. So I guess two of us went more the science route, and my other sister was more into languages, which was my mother's interest. My mother was really interested in literature. My father, as an engineer, was a man of few words. In fact, I think when I grew up, children were very much seen and not heard.
Was he the disciplinarian?
Indirectly, but I remember we came home late and it was dark and we missed the curfew, we might be in trouble.
Despite getting up to mischief with her sisters sometimes, Professor Ramsey was an outgoing, athletic child who enjoyed various sports.
It was a wonderful way to grow up because there was a lot of freedom and it was a very outdoors life. Like I loved climbing the trees, swimming, going around on my bicycle. And I guess it was a fairly conservative education, which went to the end of primary school. But then my whole world opened up when my family traveled abroad. And I suddenly was in a completely different community as a high school student, and suddenly also learning two new languages because I didn't speak a lot of English then, and then also had to learn some Spanish in Mexico. As I said, I loved nature and I loved being outside, so anything that I could do outside I would do, whether it was with my family or just friends. It was about, I guess, the freedom to also have time to dream, because I was reflecting earlier that, we didn't have television in the days that I grew up. So your influences were basically radio and your immediate environment. So I think I was very lucky that my family did move to Mexico and that I got to broaden my world view. And I often wonder whether some of the decisions that I make now are influenced by the fact that I went to school in different countries. So I didn't finish my high school in Mexico. Halfway through, my parents then moved to Canada. And I then had the last of my high school years in Canada. And I was at a great school where academia was important. And I loved science from the beginning, which is why I guess I eventually chose to become a geneticist.
So what if your parents aren't as mellow as Professor Ramsey's or as disciplinary as Dr. Nape's mom? What if you're a nagging preteen? Professor Benjamin Roseman, who we heard from in episode 1, has the answers.
When I was young, I actually had this thing where I think, like most kids, I was really into dinosaurs, but then I decided at one point I was going to be a paleontologist. I think I was apparently walking around as a 5-year-old telling everybody this. But then somewhere along the line, I got introduced to computers. The story was that we had a computer in the home, and at one point I was, I think, irritating my father or something, and he said, okay, let's go do something with the computer. And he picked up a book on programming and gave it to me and said, okay, let's play around with this. Type away and I could make it to do things. And I thought this was absolutely phenomenal. And I became very excited about this idea that I could get this big clunky electronic box to do magical things. And over time, I started teaching myself to code. And I was really excited about this. I love this idea that if you can express it logically, you can make it happen. You could build worlds that you could only really imagine otherwise. And that took me down a path where I started then building computer games, mainly for myself, mainly because I'd keep setting myself challenges. I wonder if I could make it do this or do that. And then I decided this is what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to make computer games. This was as I was going through primary school and high school. And then, okay, obviously I should study something around this to get better at it. And the obvious choice there was computer science. I came and met with some people in the department while I was in, I think, grade 11 or 12, and decided this was the right path for me to pursue, to get really good at what I wanted to do, what I was really passionate about at the time, to build my career in designing computer games.
Our childhoods differ, but does life end when a person gets into university? No more socializing and sports? Are you doomed to a life of quiet library environments where you are sitting hunched in a corner, poring over books, or staring at a computer screen, trying to compose the opening lines to your essay? Wits University's Counseling and Career Development Unit expert, Kerry Gordon, whom we also heard from in episode 1, says that's not the case.
It's realistic to expect that the balance is going to be difficult. And I think if students go into it understanding that there are going to be challenges in balancing, especially at different points in the year, then it'll come as less of a shock or less of a challenge. Part of it is, I think, planning your year according to your curriculum. So some points in the year, like exams, are going to need more of a focus on schoolwork. And sometimes you can relax a little bit, like during VAC. But also, I suppose, often structuring your time can be really, really useful. So having a timetable for yourself or having set goals for yourself for every week to make sure that you're keeping up with your work can also just help you to make sure that you have enough time for everything that you want to fit in.
Some Witties agree with Gordon, but Professor Roseman admits it's easier said than done.
I think everyone struggles, and I felt this too, with this idea of you come to university and then suddenly you're an adult and you've got to take responsibility for everything. You've got to do this thing that I still haven't quite got the hang of managing your time. And you take responsibility and you've got to be in places, and if you're not there, that's on you, and you've got to decide what is the right way to spend your time. Again, if there's lots of exciting things going on, whether it's academically or socially or whatever it is, you've got to balance all of these things. And I think that was a big struggle and a big shock. But I think, like with everything, it's about finding your rhythm, finding the hacks that work for you, to work your way, build your system around you to support you with people, with scheduling, with technology, whatever you've got, which I still think is one of the big challenges of life, is how to use all the tools you've got at hand to solve whatever problems you've got like that.
Professor Ramsey managed to maintain her established hobbies and interests.
I had this friendship group which was broader than academics, but I did also then through Wits meet people that I spent a lot of time with. But with the outside group, we would often go on walking weekends where we'd go into the Magaliesberg or even into Golden Gate and go on these long trips. I did horseback riding. You know, there were lots of things that we did that was fun, that was outside of work. I think we didn't have as good a life-work balance as young people do now. When I look at my children, they really focus on having that balance of really doing their thing. I think I probably, if I look back, spend too much time on work and maybe not enough on making friendships, having conversations, that sort of thing. So I think I was quite focused on the work that I wanted to do.
Considering Professor Ramsey's constantly changing environment growing up, it's extraordinary that she was focused. Her advice is crucial for students whose families are far from campus.
Moving is never easy, but it has a lot to do with what you want it to be. And I think people have different personalities, and I think if you are adaptable, if you embrace your new environment, you'll do well. My mother always used to speak to people who were moving to Mexico or to Canada, and they'd ask her, does she think they'll be happy? And she'd ask them, well, were you happy in your previous move? And if they said no, she said, oh, this is going to be really difficult. But if they said, yes, it was a really nice environment, then she would say to them, you will enjoy it. And I think I've been lucky in that for me, it's been easier because I've also learned that if you see it as an adventure and you make a decision that you want to adapt and you want to be there, that it's then easier. So there are always logistical, hard things like getting to know your environment, making new friends. And I think it is easier for some people than others. And I think I was lucky too, because when I came to Johannesburg, my sister came as well. And we stayed in a commune in Melville for many years. And then you had an immediate community with you because you were staying in a house that you shared with others. And I would recommend that to people who make a transition, is to go into an environment where you know that you will have an easy way of making friends. It can be in a hall of residence or sharing a house. What also makes a difference is not only to make friends in the discipline or at work, but also outside of work with people who have other interests.
Then, of course, there is always that guy, the OG, Bosso, who has it all figured out.
I was actually a competitive dancer, so I used to do a lot of street dancing. That's one thing that helped me maintain my social life. And academia could also balance it very well. Actually, I don't believe in balance. I believe you have to tip the scales whenever you need to. So on average, it looks like there's balance.
But for those of us who, unlike Dr. Nape, find imbalance unsettling, is there strategy to refocus when things get chaotic? Gordon advises us.
It is important to know your why. So to know why you're here and what this degree and what this university experience is going to do for you. And to be able to remain focused on that, whether it's having a vision board or having it as a background on your phone or a little post-it on your mirror, something to bring you back to why this degree matters to you, and even in the difficult times, why you want to keep going through that. I think also having support around you, so even if it's hard to talk to somebody, being able to speak to a friend, a family member, lecturers, tutors, or even mentors can be really helpful. Just in, again, expecting that it's not all going to be plain sailing, but being able to adapt when things do get difficult.
As we conclude this episode, remember that whether you're navigating the challenges of university life or striving to maintain your passions and interests, it's all part of your personal growth journey. Our next episode will be about resilience and adaptation. Hack Your Future is a production brought to you by Wits University. The show is hosted and produced by me, Melusingala. The music and sound engineering is by Calvin Bueta. A special thanks to the head of marketing and communication at Wits, Sharona Patel, Zenez Kosana, and the rest of the team for assisting with planning, designing, and the management of this project. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we continue to explore the journeys of Wits alumni and how they are shaping the world. Subscribe, share, and let us know your thoughts by leaving a review. For more on Wits University, please visit www.wits.ac.za.